All right. We're gonna go ahead and get started. We can start a little early because, like I said, I want to give maximum opportunity for Aaron. So I'm going to keep the introduction extremely brief so as to give maximum opportunity for Aaron, right? So Aaron is a professor at Furman, teaches philosophy. He's an author and Furman. He's an author and has recently written this book, kind of the first he's written for a popular level, which is, I think, excellent, bringing kind of philosophical ideas to the level where a lot of us can wrestle with them and learn from them. So I'm going to turn it over to Aaron and let him talk about things for now.
Thanks so much, Greg. So yeah, my name is Aaron Simmons. I have been with you once before. I actually forget how many years ago it was because COVID has made my sensibilities really, really weird. But I got affiliated with you all because Ken Haynes, whose house I slept at last night, he came to a conference because he's the kind of, I guess, self-loathing individual that does go to philosophy conferences. He came to a conference at Furman that I hosted years ago with a friend of his, Keith Putt, who teaches here at Samford. And Keith and I are good friends. So Ken got there, we hit it off, had lunch together. He's like, well, I got to get you down to Disciples. And so he brought me down and gave a talk, had a wonderful time, became friends with Greg, with Shane. And that actually led then to meeting the Detmers and working with Christian for the last 4 or 5 years now. I think it's been doing philosophy. And so now Christian teaches me philosophy. But I speak all over the world, more hundreds of times than I can remember. And never has it been the case that such a small, tight-knit community has led to so many deep relationships. And so you all are unbelievably impressive. And I stand in gratitude for everything that goes on here. So I'm glad to be back with you. I am currently finishing what my wife told me. She's a marketing director for Chick-fil-A, and so she's helping me narrate myself more compellingly. But well, she told me to call a book tour. So I've been camping my way around the country for the last week and mountain biking every chance I can. Just got finished, spoke yesterday in Springfield, Missouri, and then drove down last night, got in about midnight, slept over at Kent's house and got up this morning. And so this is the last stop on this little tour, and I'm riding Oak Mountain this afternoon and heading back to Greenville. So it's been an absolutely fantastic. I figure anytime that you can go on a book tour that involves camping and mountain biking and fishing, you're doing something right. So I feel very blessed. So I do want to thank Ken and Greg for bringing me back. Couple quick things. First, when we get done, I hope I get to talk to all of you. And this is also a thing my wife told me I need to tell people. So when we get done, please come say hello, grab a copy of the book if you'd like. And we'll fist bump rather than shake hands, because I don't want to catch whatever Greg got. Not sure he's probably lit most of y'all today. Recently I gave a talk and this guy came up and he comes in, one of those like high handshakes, comes in strong. And I went like this to meet him. And he just looked at me and he was like, oh, this is now a battle of will. And I was like, really? This is where we're going to fight this out? So it turns out he just then withdrew the hand. So I'm telling you ahead of time, so you don't think I'm not being rude. All right. So after I am done, I do have books for sale, which again, it makes me feel creepy and weird. I hate just self-promoting things. The way I look at it, though, is these ideas are ideas I really think are worth sharing. And they're less my ideas and more existential philosophy ideas that I think are powerful. And so I'm trying to be a conduit and pass those on to you. All the paperbacks are $18. But I normally sell the stickers, but because I love you all so much, if you buy a book, take a sticker with you. And I have 3, I'll mention them now just because they will make sense in a minute. The question of my book is, what is worthy of your finitude? Finitude, simply the idea that you're going to die. So you got to make the most of your time. You are finite. So the question, what's worthy of your finitude, is one sticker. The other, risk with direction. For you bikers or skiers, you'll recognize the double black diamond is the expert only trail. I define faith as risk with direction. And so this sticker is a way of saying there are no green trails in life. All of us have to figure out how to navigate those different trails of life. And so there's my definition of faith. And then finally, just want to be bold about it. I camp with Kierkegaard as a way of identifying yourself. And what I love about this and why if you don't buy a book, take a sticker. And the reason is there's a big mega church in my neck of the woods that has lots of t-shirts and stickers and bumper things that all just say, I heart my church. Y'all probably are familiar with that particular space. I think it would be way cooler to be like, oh, you must go to Disciples Fellowship because you camp with Kierkegaard. There's a little bit, I think that's cool. Yeah.
I just got a quick question. Existentialism, what does that mean?
Oh, I am going to tell you. Give me 2 seconds, don't worry. I'll also tell you who Kierkegaard is. So I'm realizing I'm telling you camp with this thing that doesn't make any sense. So Greg's right. The book that I wrote just came out about 6 weeks ago is the first of 13. I've written 12 other books. All of them are unreadable tomes. I do not recommend them to any of you. Whenever people ask me to sign those books, I always say one thing, to Greg, I'm so sorry. They are written for people who read Danish and love modal semantics and stuff. And so they are not written for, humans who have friends. So, or have ever been on dates. So this book is different. This is a book, and I'm going to explain some of this in the talk today. This book I wrote for, it's the first book I've written that I want my 14-year-old son to read. There'll be moments that he struggles with, but he will get the ideas. And it's also the book I wrote for all of my friends at the retirement community in Greenville who are 75 trying to figure out, does their life still have meaning? And for friends of mine in their middle age trying to figure out what it looks like to keep doing what it is that they've done a lot of, right? And so this book is intentionally designed to sort of hit you wherever you find yourself. Whether it does that or not is up to you. I have been unbelievably humbled by the early reviews that have been coming in, saying that it seems to be doing that for a lot of people. And so I'm unbelievably honored by the response it's been getting. This picture, just to situate you. So what I'm going to do today, I no longer read papers when I give academic talks because it's boring. But when I present this book, I read from the book. And the point is, I want you to feel the book, right? It's written, part of the whole point of it is not just about ideas, it's also about a certain kind of affect, a certain kind of experience. So I'm going to try my best to kind of take you camping with me, sitting by a campfire for a little while. But to get us started, this picture is taken from a friend of mine, owns a cabin in Jones Gap State Park, South Carolina. This is the view from his living room. It's only a one-room cabin. So when I say living room, I should need to mention from his room. This is the view. And I took this picture because I wrote about 50% of the book sitting right there looking at this. The other 50% of the book was written on top of mountains in North Carolina. And so this book was not written in libraries. It was written out in the wild. So it's not a book that has lots of footnotes. It is a book, however, that is a spontaneous attempt to try to think about what matters in the midst of a place that brings me joy. So without further ado, let me go ahead and dive in. I'm going to present to you a very abridged version of the preface and the postscript. And that way you're getting kind of the bookends. And both of them are framed about sitting at the campfire, getting ready to go do something, and then coming back to the camp after having done it. And then between it are 10 chapters that talk about a lot of other aspects. And yes, I didn't make it up. Like I actually went to the woods and sat by the campfire and wrote the stuff. So it's all true in that sense. So as something of an epigraph, I wasn't able to use it as an epigraph in the book because I couldn't afford the copyright on it. The permissions were too expensive. But I want to read you the lyrics of a song by a guy named Donovan Woods. I cite him several times in the book. But for me, he does in one song what it takes me 200 pages to try to do. Does my brother and me like to climb this tree? We were going to build a little clubhouse about 10 feet off the ground. We drew the whole thing up, needed wood and our dad's truck. but he was out of work that summer. The truck only had one gear. He said, we'll do it next year. My buddies and me, we have this dream. We're going to rent this cabin way up in Montana. We're going to fish. We had the date all picked. And then my old man got sick and the plan kind of disappeared. But we'll do it next year. My little boy and me, we were out to eat. He said, I can't wait till next year. When I asked him why, he said, because we're going camping. We're going to the ball game. And we'll do all them other things that you said we'd do next year. So when is it next year? And in his chorus, he says, another day down, another week gone. You're always talking about tomorrow. You can't beg, steal, or borrow, or make time. So you make plans and hope for the best. Life moves on so fast. Another 12 months flies on by, but you're still here. It's never quite next year. My old man, he was fading fast. He said, I think I'd like to go see that Grand Canyon. So we just left, packed up the car and went. I called in sick to work. We drove till 3 a.m. There ain't no next year. So with that as something of an epigraph, let me invite you to go camping with me. There's something different about the shadows that a campfire casts. Unlike the shadows on the sidewalk during the midst of day, campfire shadows don't stay still. They dance unpredictably. They are alive. In the distance, I hear a small waterfall on the river creek that runs near my campsite. It's staggering to me that folks pay a lot of money for apps that will play sounds of a river to help them sleep, but then they're unwilling to find ways to get to the mountains to spend time near rivers. I largely mark my life by rivers. And there's a particular spot on a river in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, where I remember vividly sitting while I was in high school and thinking about what I hoped my life would look like. There's another spot on the Hiwassee River in Reliance, Tennessee, where I asked my wife to marry me. By the way, a thing, got to know your audience, folks. My wife doesn't love rivers and fishing. So yeah, she said yes. Might have, yeah. On a river in DuPont State Forest outside Hendersonville, North Carolina, I once caught the biggest brown trout of my life, and then it slipped out of my hands before my dad could get a picture. This is not that. This is a nice rainbow. But I actually have a picture of me looking like just so stoked, and I have nothing. That same river is one that I often jump into in order to cool off after a long mountain bike ride in the summer heat. It's interesting to me that so many philosophers have used rivers and mountains to make significant points about the meaning and purpose of human existence. I think they were definitely onto something. Now, I admit that my mind keeps jumping to tomorrow when I get to bike out on the trails in Pisgah National Forest, and then in the afternoon hit the Davidson River, maybe the North Mills River, depending on what the water levels look like, and see if I can get a few trout. But that anticipation is not the cause of my joy now. The campfire, the stars, the breeze, the taste of the hot chocolate, the dancing shadows, these are in themselves enough. Here I am. Why should I waste time wanting to be somewhere else? Now, look, we all spend far too much of our lives trying to get somewhere else. We dream of the next vacation, the next promotion, the next relationship, the next car, the next iPhone. We do this for an entirely sensible reason. The vast majority of our life is not what we wish it were. We struggle to be content with where we are because we're so concerned about getting where we're going. The problem with this way of living is that it causes us to be nearly entirely occupied with external accomplishments as the key to meaningful existence. In this book, I refer to that way of living as a success orientation. That's what I am critical of. On this success model, only if we achieve X or do Y or obtain Z do we think that we will have enough, indeed ever be enough. As David Foster Wallace so aptly explains, this approach to living will inevitably leave us empty. We will never have, never do, never be enough to satisfy the insatiable hunger for more, for the next thing, for what we lack. Listen to how Wallace cashes out this idea in relation to his notion of worship. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, you'll never have enough. Never feel you have enough. Worship your body and beauty and sexuality, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start to show, you'll die a million deaths before they finally plant you. Now look, Wallace's point here is that the object of our worship defines us. Turns out this is also St. Augustine's view. He calls it desire, but it's the exact same idea. What we worship is ultimately where we find real worth. It's what constitutes what we consider worthy. In the end, what we worship matters because it will name who we end up becoming. Such things matter because we don't have an infinite amount of time. In other words, you can't spend forever to decide what's worth worshiping. We are finite. Again, finitude, a word I think just is like, Mountain Dew. Okay, we all know this. Turns out a lot of, what's finitude? Finitude is just we are gonna die, right? You are finite. You're not infinite. It's all it is. Because we are finite, our decisions carry weight. However, how often do we slow down, take a step back, silence our phones, and really ask ourselves, what is worthy of my finitude? Only when we ask this question can we begin to take seriously that life is not best understood as a task of external accomplishing. Getting jobs, getting married, getting a house, getting a car, getting a reputation, getting a retirement fund. Rather, life is better conceived as a task of becoming a self. Another way of asking what's worthy of your finitude is, who are you becoming? These existential questions, see, I told you we'd get there. These existential questions are not focused on success as a standard of meaning, but instead encourage us towards what I will term in this book, faithfulness. This idea of faithfulness is one according to which joy is a lived task of self-making. So joy is not about getting the car, joy is about becoming the self that I actually am okay with. Now, in this sense, the goal becomes not that I have to do or have something in order to be significant, but constantly to live toward what I think is worthy of my finitude, my time, and my life. In this way, we avoid the temptation to be done with living before life is done with us. Or as Henry David Thoreau would say, I should strive to live so that I would not, when I come to die, discover I had not yet lived. This is why I define faith as risk with direction, because we're finite, and existentialism is just that view of philosophy, that we focus on our contingency, our vulnerability, our finitude, and we say, so what then should I choose? That's why it stresses freedom and agency as part of who we are. Existential philosophy is just that stuff. So I define faith as risk with direction because there is no non-risky set of choices. Every choice will then dictate who I am becoming. And I can make some really boneheaded decisions if I'm not careful. But if I don't have a direction that's on purpose, that's intentional, I'm still taking just as much risk. I'm just doing it now without being conscious of it. And the most dangerous thing we do is not taking a bad line on the mountain bike. It's closing our eyes while going off of a feature, right? Risk with direction, that's fair. Now look, I'm a philosopher. And so I tend to think about these questions in terms of existential philosophy. In particular, the 19th century Danish philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard, is someone to whom I frequently turn as I try to wrestle with my own existence, with what matters in my existence, with why it matters that I exist. It's Kierkegaard who encourages us to take seriously the task of becoming a self, and it's Kierkegaard who I'm paraphrasing in my conception of faithfulness. Now, it is easy to be philosophical, I admit, while sitting by campfires, far from what Wordsworth calls the den of towns and cities. However, philosophy is not something to be done occasionally. It is instead meant to be a way of life that facilitates intentional reflection on how to live well. in our busy lives, we tend just to accept as given, as obvious, whatever value theory is operative in our broader social context. Whatever they say matters is what we take for granted as mattering for us. My son walks like a duck all the time now. You guys know why. Why? Why might you walk this way? Because you don't want to what? Come on, you guys know this. You don't want to crease your shoes. Right? Can't have wrinkles. Insane. And yet my son will look like a fool to fit in with the value theory that says you are somehow less of a person if your shoes got creases.
Oh my goodness.
So we're all in here. Like, this is top to bottom. Ball caps, he's weird. He gets mad at me. He's trying more and more to get my caps to flatten.
Yeah.
Because I normally wear them like, I'm a fisherman, right? Like,
What you're supposed
and yeah, my son is like, Dad, no one does that. Stop. So he's helping me flatten my cap. It turns out, and this is true at the retirement home where I work a lot and I have tons of friends. It's true all the way down to my son. It's as if we are all still in middle school, trying to be accepted by the cool kids. The history of philosophy is, I suggest, effectively a long meditation on the emptiness of trying to be cool. Rather than worrying about what the cool kids think, Socrates suggests we should only be concerned about what virtuous people think. In other words, we should be careful not to simply think well about what's worthy of our finitude, but we should also think well about those to whom we turn as we try to figure that out. Another way to put this is, it's not just important to pick good trails, it's also important to pick good hiking partners. By the way, footnote, I have a newsletter that I do every month. Some of you may subscribe already. If not, you can go to my website and get subscribed. But I end every single newsletter with the words, "Come, let's walk together and talk along the way," which sort of narrates a lot of what I'm suggesting. That was also the final covenant my wife and I made to each other in our wedding vows. So come, let's walk and talk together. In many ways, Kierkegaard is the last person I want to take camping with me. He was infamously melancholic, miserable human. Like, had no friends. Dude was, yeah. But I believe that his work and other existential philosophers is a profound resource for living well. I go camping because it allows me to prioritize such things as living on purpose. And so going camping with Kierkegaard is not a literal thing, but a metaphorical encouragement to be purposive about how we live, who we are becoming, and why it matters. And I should also say, the camping stuff, you may say, well, my wife, she wants to be at the beach in a resort. She thinks sleeping on the ground is utterly insane and no reason that people ever should do this. So she's like, why would I put myself through misery to find meaning, right? That's not the point of the book. Whether it's going to the beach or listening to a better playlist or drinking better coffee or just having longer conversations. The point is, I'm giving you my examples of things that allow me to live into this way of life. You got to figure out what those things are for you, right? So it's not just a book for people who enjoy the outdoors. It's a book that's showing you my love of the outdoors as a way of inviting you to try to show more effectively what you love, right? So another footnote, my wife's like, make sure beach people know. I just threw another log on the fire and in the process burnt my hand. Finitude is marked not only by the task of meaning making, but also by essentially embodied vulnerability. Our bodies age, they break, they die. This is part of the deal. Being human is not something to try to overcome, but something to try to inhabit more fully. Even being here by the campfire, I have to admit, is a divergence from the vast majority of my life up to this point. Even though I love fishing and I got my PhD in order to be a professor so I could fish in the summers. My dad was a professor. Dude fished like 80 days a year. So I was like, yes, please, sign me up. It turns out I didn't understand tenure, which he already had. It turns out, though, that I have spent far more time in pursuit of a career that would facilitate my time in the mountains than I have actually spent time going to. 80-hour work weeks have been all too normal for me ever since I was in my mid-20s. I am now 46. I've been married for over 20 years. My wife, Vanessa, and I have a 14-year-old son, Atticus. Although I'm an advocate of hard work, I celebrate excellence as a virtue worth cultivating. It brings me some degree of regret, maybe even shame, to realize that most of what I've gotten for all those hours, all those years, stress, anxiety, time away from my family in the mountains that I love. When the COVID pandemic hit, something broke in me. Finitude seemed all too real. Vulnerability seemed an unmanageable burden. Far too many of us, myself included, were racked by the isolation, the despair, the fear, the interruption of our success-oriented lives. I had so many students reach out to me, in tears. I don't know what to do. My life is over. How will I move forward? I'm like, oh my goodness, what happened? Did your mom pass away? Has there been a tragedy? No, they've canceled my internship. I have failed you. If I let that be the thing, I have failed. I realized that the philosophy I had taught for 20 years was not something that I was putting into practice in my own life. So I resolved to change things. As everyone was trying to get back to normal, I decided maybe normal was not something to long for in the first place. I became overwhelmed with the realization that since we do not have an infinite amount of time, it matters what we do with the time we have. What's worthy of my finitude was no longer an abstract question for the philosophy classroom. It transformed into the urgent question, what will I then do with my finitude? And it became a matter of daily decision. So I went to the mountains. I took my son to the mountains. One of the very few benefits of virtual school, turns out. I'm actually entirely fine if we just stayed all virtual. My son would hate it. But he and I could camp all the time. All that sounds like to him is, you mean more time with my dad? No. We have different views on this. I bought a mountain bike, bought new backpacking gear. I stopped viewing work as the thing that prevented me from camping, and instead decided to go camping with Kierkegaard and make going to the mountains a means of doing my work more effectively. I decided not simply to be a philosophy professor, but to strive to become a philosopher. I realized that a success orientation might make me money, but it might cost my existence. This was a price I was no longer willing to pay. I don't need a Porsche. Wow, this hot chocolate is good. My priorities got resituated as my identity got reshaped. The brokenness that COVID made visible to me also illuminated the brokenness of our society. This connects to Greg's sermon this morning. And the despair that's been felt by so many for so long, especially within historically marginalized communities. Existential philosophy, for all its flaws, is right about the radical contingency of existence. In other words, normal is neither obvious nor necessary. Things can be different. Any hip hop heads in the room might be familiar with Bus Driver Greza song, "We Can Make It Better." I'm concerned, or convinced, that such change starts in small ways in our daily lives. It's for this reason that I see this book as an invitation for us all to think carefully about how we are spending our lives, how we are orienting our projects, how we are forming our beliefs, and how we are understanding meaning. So as I try to make clear, going camping, fishing, biking, hiking are simply my preferred ways to facilitate this intentional reflection. These are the activities that bring me joy, that allow finitude not to be something that I desire to escape, but something that I hope to inhabit more effectively. They call to me and I try my best to respond. But these specifics may not. The point's not that you literally go camping, but that you become existentially aware, that you live on purpose, that you strive towards faithfulness, however you understand that to make sense for you. I hope that you will join me here by the campfire, like the large crow that's now walking toward me and the squirrels who are playing in the trees. We don't have to talk philosophy the whole time, but maybe we can live philosophically together on the trails, in our offices, in our churches, and in our homes. So now we're going to jump to the epilogue. So that's the beginning, abridged. There's a lot more stories and stuff. So it's been a great day on the trails. Now I'm back at camp. There are a bunch of good feelings in life, but one of the very best is the exhaustion that comes after a long day of physical exertion in the course of doing what's love. I used to get a faint shadow of that feeling when I worked construction in high school and college. After a full day of painting door frames, hanging sheetrock, sanding trim in preparation for the primer coat, my body was weary, but in that good way that makes you feel like your time was worth the effort. Y'all know that feeling? Yes, right. You know, every time I volunteer doing anything, right, you get tired and something, it's like, that was worth it. Right? The difference, though, between that feeling at the end of the day of construction and the day of being in the mountains is that while on the construction site, I felt good that the day was done, right? Whereas when I'm in the mountains, I feel good that I am right there at that moment and living in the hope that more days might continue to define my existence. Two of my friends and I today rode Avery Creek Trail in Pisgah National Forest. This is the Black Diamond Trail. And it was my first time down this particular trail. This trail, I wrote this a few years ago. I've been down it many more times since then. This trail definitely warrants its Black Diamond rating. It has big drops, steep rock gardens, a 25-foot gap jump, and lots of gnarly flow. It reminds you that risk is real. But this is true in mountain biking and in life. The thing that really hits me, though, as I unpack some gear for my truck in preparation for making dinner, is that the downhill run, which seems to go on forever, like to the point where your quads start burning and your arms start burning, and you have to stop just to let your muscles get to the point where you can pull your brake levers. Like it's that intense, just letting the bike go in front of you. It still beats you up.
No idea what you're talking about.
So awesome. So good. But that downhill fun was only possible because of the extremely long climb up to the trailhead. It turns out that after miles of climbing your bike to the steep trail, and then more miles of actively carrying your bike up steeper trails, because you can't push it up, only then do you tighten your helmet, put on elbow guards, zip up your body armor, and drop in so that you can send it on the downhill. Although the risk greatly increases going down, it's only by willfully, intentionally, and purposively directing yourself uphill for a very long time, like 3 hours, to get 20 minutes. It's only then that the downhill gets earned. It's not that the downhill justifies the good exhaustion back at the campsite. It's the climb that preceded it. Right? So the same is true of nearly all other outdoor activities. Backpacking leaves me good exhausted because to get to the really cool campsites, you have to traverse many miles before getting the opportunity to make camp. But then sitting around a small campfire, eating food out of a bag that's reconstituted by water filtered from the stream and boiled over a teeny camp stove, your body reminds you why this is so very worth your finitude. Nothing tastes better than hot chocolate after a 15-mile day of backpacking. It's as if your body enacts the yes saying that the philosopher Nietzsche claims is the condition for living. Yes, yes, so much yes. Turns out amen just means yes. While riding a different trail recently, I'll just talk you through this because it's better to sort of show you. So this is my buddy Seth. He's an Episcopal priest. He's 47, I'm 46. We were riding a different trail recently. And on this trail, there's a little stretch where basically the trail just sort of disappears. And, you know, kind of from me to that water bottle, it picks up again on that side. But right here, there's sort of a waterfall that runs through it. And so what they've done is built a little wooden bridge across it that's about this wide, right? And it's just boards. There's no rails or anything. And so you're riding around and you ride across that bridge. But as soon as you get to the other side of the bridge, there's an immediate left turn. So you have to basically, as you get to the edge of the bridge, already start kind of lifting and turning the bike so your back wheel doesn't fall off into the crack, right? So I'm, I don't know, 50 feet back or so from Seth. He hits that bridge and it had been raining and he resets his tires. So he does one quick flip of his pedals to try to get just enough traction to lift his front tire to make that turn. And unfortunately, his rear wheel slips. And all I saw, this dude's 6'3", all I saw was him kind of elevate for a second, scream, and then just disappear. I mean, it was like I watched him fall. He was just gone. Wow. And it was so There, I quit running up. I looked down, screamed, Seth, are you okay? There are rocks, there's downed trees. I mean, it's a place you do not want to fall, probably about 20 foot. But there in the mud, on the sides of the rocks, avoiding the tree, was Seth, who took a deep breath and felt the contingency of his existence. He and I both appreciated the beauty of that contingency. We didn't have to be there. You don't have to be here. None of us do. Philosophers have long expressed the wonder that comes with this awareness of the beauty of the contingency of existence by asking, why is there something rather than nothing? Now, look, there's lots of answers that philosophers have given to this complicated question. Just ask Christian. But for me, sitting here by the fire, thinking about that close call, and the fact that Seth and I were back on the trails just a few days later, hitting even bigger feature, pushing each other to find joy in the fragile moments of finite existence, I'm less concerned with the answer to why is there something, and way more impressed by the fact that you and me are all part of the something that is. So just to give you a sense, this so doesn't look as good on video, but this is about 30 foot from here to here. And it's like each one of these things is like, 3 feet, right? So it looks like, but this scares the ever-loving heck out of me. So this is the first time I ever wrote down this. And again, it looks like nothing, but when I got to the bottom, Seth is here, my buddy Wayland's down here. One of them had just ridden it in front of me, ran into a tree, clipped it with his handlebar. He went flying. And so we're all down at the bottom fist bumping each other because the risk that we were willing to take had a direction that we thought was worth our time. The point is, and this is sort of the metaphorical idea, it wasn't that I was safe. Ooh, now risk. The point was, I was just as much facing that risk every decision I make, every minute that I live. Do I major in this or not? Do I date this person or not? Do I continue to think my life matters after I retire? All of those things are just as risky as riding down a bunch of steep stairs. Good exhaustion is not only occasioned by steep climbs, but it's also conditioned by the fact that we could have been doing something else. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says somewhere that unlike Martin Luther, who says, here I stand, I can do no other, he says, we can always do otherwise, and that's the key, right? The fact is you could choose to do something else. We could have been sitting on the couch all day. We could have been in the hospital with a loved one. We could have been stuck in traffic. We could have been, frustrated because it got rained out and unable to ride. But here we are. Tired, yes, but in all the right ways. Tired because we are not invulnerable. Think about it. If we were invulnerable, we'd never be tired. Right? We only get tired because we are vulnerable. Tired because we're not infinite. Tired because we are. My son Atticus loves campfires. He loves them so much that they are often the source of great frustration when we camp together because I am scared he's going to burn down the forest. All he wants to do is play with sticks in the fire and then take those sticks and draw on rocks. Well, the tricky thing about Atticus's love of campfires is that he lacks the experience with them that provides the practical wisdom about how to navigate them responsibly. This is the outdoor club at Furman, at least our old for people. They had a parents' night. So these are all the parents of the outdoor club, which I sponsored. So we're all hanging out around the fire. But actually, this is probably interesting. So you'll see this awesome, well-designed fire pit to contain the fire and keep it safe. Yeah. So my foolish students who all think that they can do all things and all of them perfectly had requested to have this campfire. They put in the request with the Office of Outdoor Recreation, and the Office of Outdoor Rec said, yeah, that's fine. You have to have an official campfire like spot, be an actual campfire ring or a burn barrel. Can't just light a fire in the middle of a field. Utterly sensible, right? Not a big ask. Their response was, oh, yeah, we have a camp ring. We're good. When I tell you what it was, a divot where the ground just kind of went down. But the good news was it was ringed by really tall grass. Like this was their,
Oh my goodness.
we've done fires there. We have a campfire. So I went out on my own, did not tell them, and built them a stinking camp ring so that they actually could do this thing that they were going to do. But the responsibility, the practical awareness, the fact that I have seen things go wrong allowed me to help them navigate the risk a little bit more effectively, right? Fires have a way of refusing to go out easily, it turns out. They deceive even the wisest among us. My dad, who spent a great deal of time in the outdoors, recently had a fire in his backyard fire pit. It was a lovely evening, hot dogs, s'mores, family, fun. Night ended, he poured water over the fire and he went to bed. Next day, he went out to clear the ash that remains from the fire. And so he took a shovel, right, dug into the ash. He assumed was all this cold ash, threw it out in the woods behind his house. Yeah, there's some wisdom. He threw the shovel's contents to the woods, cleaned up the last few remnants of the grandkids' inability to keep the graham crackers in their mouths, and he went inside. 15 minutes later, he happened to glance out the window and to his horror saw that the ground where he had thrown the ash was ablaze.
Oh.
My dad is 81 and has cancer, but that man can move quick. The embers down deep in the fire pit had somehow avoided the water he poured over them. They remained hot. They remained ready to reignite. Simply put, despite his best efforts, they remained. Embers are like that. They stay warm after the flames are out. The fire in front of me is now burning brightly, but unless I really make sure to drown the fire, the embers are likely to be hot in the morning, even though the fire has been out for hours. Fire safety notwithstanding, I think there's an important lesson we can all learn from the embers that remain. This is a lesson I think that can speak to us as we close out our time in the mountains together. The idea is that our lives should be more like embers than fires, more like mountains than cities. Fires come and go, but embers remain hot long after the fires are gone. Cities come and go, and so does the cultural relevance of this or that important thing celebrated by influencers. You know, don't crease shoes. But the mountains that we see in the distance of these cities remain stable, even as our fashions, our priorities, and our life stages change. I'm 46, but I still go to the same spot where my dad and I fished together when I was 20. It remains there as a witness to the fungibility of my own interests. The river doesn't care if I fish it, but I care if I don't teach my son to fish. I'm now a full professor of philosophy, but I can still go to the same trail that I hiked when I was a grad student, wondering if I'd ever find a job. The mountain doesn't care if I return, but I love that my life can be marked by the miles on the trail as much as by career accomplishments. My wife and I have been married for 20 years, actually 23 maybe. Yet the place where we went camping together on the first date, again, gotta know your audience, kids, like, don't take camping. Propose at a fancy resort. The trees have grown, generations of animals have come and gone in the forest. The forest doesn't care if we go camping again, but my wife and I definitely find peace in the fact that in the face of so much that is lost as we age, the place is there as a testament to our investment in each other. Embers, like mountains, remain, and they call out to us for response. The first rule of being in the mountains is to leave no trace. But when it comes to human existence, the opposite is true. Yes, we are vulnerable, but we are relational. These are the two facts about the human condition I've argued motivate the need for faithfulness as a way of life. What will remain of what you willed to be true, to be meaningful, and to be beautiful? There are two ways to think about these traces that we leave of our finitude. We can make a mark, or we can leave a legacy. Making a mark is fine, but it's also fleeting because it operates according to the very logic of success we were trying to avoid. It's what happens when you donate money to get your name on a plaque outside of a building, or endow a scholarship that carries your name, or do something else that causes a statue of you to be built in the local park. These are good things, and many of us have benefited from the marks made by others. Leaving a legacy, by contrast, appeals to faithfulness. It's not about your name being remembered, but about others being able to live into their names in light of the virtue, the excellence, and the example that you made plausible as a way of life worth undertaking. Marks are like fires. They burn brightly. Plaques shine in the sun. Fires crackle and pop and make their presence known. Praise from others is easy to see, and the applause from the crowd is easy to hear. Fires are a record of our activities in real time. Marks are things that we get to see as part of our experience. Legacies, alternatively, are like embers and mountains. Mountains disappear into the background and are forgotten in light of the new housing development, the outdoor shops, the new cars, the phones that occupy our attention. Embers can be forgotten as we pack up the truck, thinking that what really mattered is now done. Similarly, legacies are not things that are shiny and popular. They are a record of long persistence. They are mementos to the importance of meaning making, not simply cheering what the crowd think matters. Marks can disappear once the plaque is changed, the statue breaks, and the scholarship expires. Legacies remain, even if their origins are forgotten. I care far less that my son wants to be like me than I do that he wants to be kind, charitable, and courageous. Those virtues are what matter. Accordingly, I try to live a life that leaves a legacy such that those virtues are normative for him. They are habits that he lives into rather than objects he desires to obtain. I got more courage than you, deal with it. Like, doesn't make any sense, right? A life of faithfulness leaves a legacy worthy of our finitude. Rather than encouraging others to be like us, faithful legacies foster space for others to be faithful to what they think matters. It's not about getting others to remember us, but to remember why it matters to live on purpose. It's not about being celebrated as having won the game of life, but about appreciating every day what the philosopher Nick Riggle terms this beauty of existence, this beauty that we are here, this beauty of good exhaustion, this beauty of those who walked the trails before us and now form the cloud of witnesses, encouraging us to keep moving forward. This fire is beautiful, but the embers that remain hot tomorrow will remind us that tomorrow is beautiful too, even if the fire is gone. Life is poorly understood according to a success logic of achievement, but shines forth in its contingent singularity when we enact a faithfulness logic of ever striving toward who we hope to become. I am indeed stoked that my buddies and I made it down Avery Creek. As we say to each other now, we're all in our 40s. We're trying to get to lunch, not to the ER. But the accomplishment that matters is not that we rode the trail, but that we prioritize riding. I want to catch a trophy trout, but what matters is not that I have a fish on the wall, but that I find ways to keep fishing. Although it's cool to make the mark of your name on the list of folks who through hiked the Appalachian Trail. I had a guy at the meeting yesterday walk up to me afterwards, he's like, dude, I did the whole trail. And we like jumped up, it's amazing. But it doesn't really matter. That's not the point. It's way cooler to leave a legacy whereby others who may never even hear your name, and that's the weird part about legacies, they get to live into the joy and agency in their spheres of influence. Embers, like mountains, remain as vulnerable and relational beings trying to figure out what is worthy of our finitude. That stability should humble us and yet inspire us toward an even deeper gratitude. Thank you for joining me on the trail, for hiking with me a few miles more, for casting out your line in the waters in which we both stand, for dropping in at the top and fist bumping at the bottom and at the book table, and for coming camping with me in Kierkegaard. Our time together has so been worthy of my finitude. I hope it was worthy of yours as well. Yeah. Any thoughts or questions or anything at all we can talk about?
We'll do fine on blood.
Can't wait. Yeah, please.
So you mentioned the seniors, I guess, that you go to and see and
Yeah.
So how for people who have barriers like living in an institution, or people, I know we have a lot of doctors in here, we're seeing people desperately sick. How do you communicate this in terms of like micro moments for people who live in a completely different, who have a different set of barriers than many of us do to try to live into what you're talking?
Yeah, so throughout the book and cut from what I was trying to present today is the idea that two things. One, there are barriers that are matters of injustice, and those historical barriers are things that should convict us if the agency, the existential calling we are able to embody is not actually shared with all others who share equal dignity. But notice my This is not a book about justice, though it's certainly, I think, laying the framework for why it matters. Because notice, well, why should I mean, it's not written for Christians. So I can't just say, oh, well, you should love your neighbor because God says so. Why should I care about justice for God? Well, I think this existential approach says, well, because if we don't live according to a success logic, I have absolutely no way to differentiate between the dignity of all people, right? Because all of us are defined by the same task of faithfulness, the possibility of risk, the requirement of direction. If I allow success logic to take over, which our culture has certainly embraced and encouraged, I have all kinds of reasons not to care about them. Their choices led to that crappy life. And on we go with a very particular model of narrating the world as, in fact, something I deserve and I am entitled to. And in fact, they could change if they want to, right? The whole problem of the success logic is it eliminates the argument for justice. So, yes, unless we are attending to facilitating a world that makes agency possible for everyone, none of this matters. But I'm trying to show what's the world that might be, right? So that we can then start saying, all right, how do I do that personally? And then what's the calling I now have to try to create a world where others can as well? But you're also talking about, we might say, barriers that are simply a matter of time, age, and finitude themselves, right? Different kinds of disabilities, different kinds of aptitude, different types of opportunities because of, my goodness, right? The heartbreaking scenes we're seeing coming out of Israel and Gaza right now, like, I admit, it makes me feel really, really self-conscious. Like, well, you don't need to hear about this. Like, let's just talk about them and focus there. But I'm reminded of C.S. Lewis, who says, all of the arguments seem to cut in favor of when the bombs are dropping. He's talking about World War II. We should stop doing philosophy and instead go try to save the lives of others. And he says, absolutely. But unless we do philosophy when bombs are dropping, we will never do it when they aren't. So part of what I'm hoping is that this allows us to become the kind of people who say, well, shoot, if you're stuck in that retirement home, which you're going to have lots of friends who are, the temptation is to think they have no agency. I can't leave this place, therefore I'm worthless. I no longer work, therefore I have no contribution. But what's so cool is we start realizing it was never about those box checkings, right? So as my friend Wendy Farley, an amazing queer feminist theologian, says, sometimes beauty and joy are simply refusing to get out of the car until the song finishes. Right? So that notion shows up throughout the book as, what might this look like at these little micro moments, as you say. But I think that if we focus too much on the micro moments without the argument for faithfulness as a way of life, we can again make them turn into a kind of success logic. I am checking my box more often making this happen. So I require my students, for example, to have a joy list. So every day in class, like, all right, what are you doing today just for joy? The point is, I tell them you are not allowed to check it off. The point is, are these things that you will find ways to make priorities? Full stop. Not it. My wife's the kind of person who she writes her to-do list at the end of the day, but then it's always full and it's always done. There's nothing that she had to do today she didn't do because she writes her list at the end of the day. Get out of bed. Oh, done. It's perfect, right? Not get to work and finish that paper. Done. Like everything she does, it's always in retrospect. So there's lots of different ways to think about this, but I would say there's two levels. Injustice, where you got to have the framing of why it is we care about justice, and that's what I'm trying to envision. It's Richard Rorty, philosopher, says critique is good, alternatives are better. So I'm trying to give an alternative way so that we can understand why the critique matters. And then those micro moments become the fact that most people can't. I mean, it's because I'm privileged. I can buy a new bike and head to the woods and take off a week of work and do this. A lot of people can't.
You do draw.
I do.
So you keep it right.
I am keeping record. Here's the thing. and this is important for my students. It's not that we aren't concerned with this, with success.
You know, we're about failing.
We just let the success be something that now is narrated as logistics. So I think if you care about faithfulness as your anchor, all the other stuff, it's just logistics. So you really want to risk yourself in the direction of becoming a professor? Awesome. Logistics of going to get a PhD are going to have to be some boxes you check. But how many of us know those PhDs who walk around as lords among humans, right? Because they've done the PhD. And the worry I have is if success names you, one of two things will happen. And believe me, I get calls from CEOs of Fortune 500 companies saying this stuff all the time to me. If that was the goal, that's what defined you, that's who you wanted to become. You'll either pull it off, in which case I hope you get hit by a bus quick, because you do not have any resources for living the day after you pull it off. Right? Your whole life, your whole existence was oriented toward doing it. You do it. My wife wanted to run a marathon. So she ran a half marathon. And she did it. The day after she did this, the sticker went on the back of the truck, 13.1. She has not run since. She's like, done.
Checked it off.
And she keeps buying new stickers. That one's faded. So it's not bad. It's just that the problem is if you do it, you then got to figure out, how do I live, given that it wasn't actually the source of meaning that I thought it was. The other option is you don't do it. And now your life is narrated as a failure. So how many middle-aged folk in particular, right? We 40 somethings feel like, God, I just didn't do what I, and so what do? We have midlife crises and we run off and try to change circumstances to think, oh, it's not me, it's the fact that this situation's messed up. It's like, well, no, you willed yourself to become this person who thought that you would be miserable unless you did that thing. You didn't do that thing, and so now you're miserable. So if we can avoid being defined by success, we avoid being destroyed by failure. But notice, that doesn't tell you what to major in, what to go do. You want to go get a bunch of money? Go get a bunch of money. It's logistics. As soon as you think the fact that you're super wealthy makes you somehow better or more entitled to the world, now you are, in a technical term, an asshole. And that's the enemy of this book. I mean it very technically. A friend of mine, Aaron James, wrote a book just called A-Holes, and the whole book is about people who think that they are systematically entitled to what other people should not access, and they immune themselves from critique because they don't consider you worthy of giving to them. Wow. What have we done in our society? Not said, well, that's messed up. Screw those guys. What we did is invite them to keynote every business conference. And then we sell every college education as allowing you an on-ramp to being one of them. And we call it real world. My whole account is that existentialism says there is no real world. There's only the world you let be real. So yes, I do Strava. I try sometimes to hit a PM, a PR or whatever.
What is that?
It's what records our rides. Yeah, no, when you bike ride or you jog or whatever, you record your ride or you record your run, and it tells you how fast you did it. KOM is king of the mountain. You're the fastest on a particular segment of trail. Turns out I was KOM of this one stretch and became a local legend on Strava. My buddy, dude, what he didn't understand was the stretch that I was the king of. The trail goes like this, it's a crazy climb. I was the king of the mountain of the road that bypassed it.
With false data there.
Your celebration is way overstated.
Shows the fallacy of data.
Yes.
So, you ask you expect the students to call you doctor?
I tell them that they can if it makes them more comfortable. But I am also fine, my parents named me Aaron, that's fine with me. Most of them end up just calling me Simmons. But it's weird. The number of colleagues I have had who have in fury told me, you will not let them call you Aaron. That is not okay, because they are not going to call me this. I worked too hard. That A, assumes I didn't work hard, right? Like, notice this really weird narrative of their own privilege. But B, it every single time comes from a feeling of inadequacy.
Mhm.
So the way I tend to put it is, academics tend to be people who are still really pissed off about having been picked on by jocks in high school. And so they tend to kind of narrate their world as, oh, now I'm going to pay you back. Now, I will say, footnote to the injustice point, there are, however, historical reasons why women, people of color, etc., using the doctor has a different kind of social power, right? So again, it's not a one size fits all.
There's a time and place.
It's I co-teach with a woman colleague of mine. How I disagree with her in public is very different than how I will disagree with her behind the scenes. I want my students to make sure that they never, ever, ever, ever are able to see it as some sort of dynamic where I'm over speaking her. Even if I think she's wrong, we'll handle that at lunch, right? So she's always Dr. Worth in my classes, because I'm trying really hard to make sure that that respect becomes something that's assumed.
Yeah, I had, when I started my program, the woman that recruited, younger, and I actually went around helping her recruit. And about 2 years into that, I called Joanne, dressed me down in class.
You will not, yep. And she's not wrong. It's just, you kind of think, huh, for me, it's like, is my ego really dependent on 18-year-olds? Maybe I should do that. Yeah, you got a hand?
Yeah,
Enjoyed your singing, man.
I enjoyed the book.
Mutual.
Chapter in there where you talk about, developing.
Read the book already.
Teacher's pet, teacher's
It
pet.
wasn't set up. But you talk about developing gratitude, hospitality, and
Humility.
in your pursuit of your faith.
Yeah.
And but you had a really interesting hospitality, you expanded it way beyond just providing some of your dinner.
Right.
But I was wondering if you could expand on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So the three virtues. So the chapters, just to give you a sense. I did have somebody ask the other day. I gave a version of what I just spoke to you guys on, and the person's like, "All right, that's fine. What's the book about?" I'll really quickly give you a kind of one sentence account of what I do in the book, and then I'll open that one up a little bit. So chapter 1, what's worthy of your finitude, I unpack the idea of faith as risk with direction and try to suggest faithfulness as the right orientation, success as being a problem, and really kind of dig into that and explain how it works. Chapter 2 is called Alone in the Mountains, which is about trying to differentiate between solitude and loneliness or isolation, and the difference being we can be empirically alone, which I love being in the mountains, but I'm never ethically alone. The trail I ride on was built by someone else. The trail, if I ride it while muddy, is ruining it for someone else. If I leave my trash, that's now making the environment less good. So the whole idea is that we're never ethically alone. We are implicated and obligated to others all the way down, right? That's what that chapter is about. Chapter 3 on being known. Any fans of Cheers, the old TV show? The whole chapter is nothing but Cheers theme song. Trying to unpack it as far as what does it mean to be known, to go someplace where you are known, and how will you be known? That's what that chapter is about. Chapter 4, Lilies, Birds, and Vanessa, is a reflection on an essay by Kierkegaard where he talks about the importance of learning silence, obedience, and joy as these modes of carrying ourselves well in life. And so I try to unpack how those work. 5 is about the joy decision. So this is where I really focus in on joy as a decided thing, not something that's dependent on contingencies. An example I don't talk about in the book, but when I give talks to religious audiences, it's always where I turn, is if you're familiar with the It's Well With My Soul story. That's effectively what I'm trying to argue here, is that when everything has gone wrong, can you still say it's well with my soul? The way that hip hop heads would say it is, when you get nothing but hate, can you still say, baby, I'm good? And the way I tell my students in the South is when someone says, you good? You can say, I'm good. Like, is that actually what we're deciding? Right? It's not a matter of them, it's a matter of us. Then chapter 6, just send it, ethics on the trail, humility, hospitality, and gratitude. I'll come back to. 7 is responding to calling. So I use John Burr's Mountains Are Calling, I Must Go. And I unpack any of you all like Drake at all? Not what it means.
Some eclectic music.
Yeah, Drake is a contemporary hip hop artist. You don't have to like any of this stuff. Again, it's trying to hit, as a professor, you have to hit the intro student who does not care and the philosophy senior who's heading to Harvard. So the book's trying to do that. Just ignore those passages. Like hip hop. So Drake has this song where he says, when the hotline bling, it can only mean one thing, and it's about booty call. But what I try to suggest, that using some phenomenology in existential philosophy, that calls are always things that are only heard in responses. So it's not that I get this call and then I'm faced with a decision. My choices create the calls that I hear. And so it's about flipping that upside down. Then chapter 8 of God and Trout Fishing, which is all about hope and different notions of hope on the river. That's where I talk about God, my notion of God. Chapter 9 is actually a chapter of aphorisms and just sort of random thoughts while hiking. Interestingly, I've had lots of people tell me that's their favorite. Here's the wrinkle. That chapter was all simply the document I had of stuff I need to come back to and maybe turn into a chapter. I never did, so I just made it a chapter. So, but people seem to like that one. And then finally, the other side of the mountain is about aging and death, because I can't talk about finitude without taking that seriously as part of it. And so I talked about my mom's 40th birthday party, which I remember vividly. And I talked about the tragic death of the person who taught me Kierkegaard at 50. He was 52 when he passed away. And so being able to think about aging and death as we come back down the mountain is sort of the hope. So those 3 ideas. I think humility, you can't change if you think you've already done something perfectly. So humility is required if we are to be concerned with justice, right? There's no reason to be concerned with justice if you've already done it exactly rightly. There's actually no reason to be faithful. We think we've already pulled it off. I'm already perfect. And so humility is this invitation to recognize that contingency matters and that decisions are still important. But if we are humble enough to realize that, we should be hospitable to others, because only in that hospitality am I open to the fact that other people help me figure out how to do things differently than from the perspective that I see. So hospitality is not just about being open to critique, open to suggestions. It's also about opening worlds. So I now express hospitality by creating a world for others that is more worthy of their finitude than the one I'm handing them, defined by war and no healthcare and climate crisis, right? So it's a duality of hospitality. And then gratitude is the idea that if we live humbly and hospitably, gratitude becomes a way of life rather than just something to show to someone. It becomes what animates the way I navigate the world. And so I use there Anne Lamott, one of my favorite authors, her book Help, Thanks, Wow, to narrate the 3 different virtues and anchor it in Anne Lamott's book.
Gratitude, and get it from Jesus and him saying love, and
right.
but philosophically,
yeah.
Gratitude seems to grow bad experiences that then you become grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
So in the circumstance with the the home, you either end up being grateful and saying, I'm thankful I'm here and I'm going to be a light to the people around me, or you become bitter and say, my life's over. So I guess, how does that explain philosophically? Where did you come from?
Yeah.
Is that a chapter in the book that I need to read?
So the thing I'm worried about with gratitude, so I try to articulate it carefully. And I should say, so my two goals in the book, which sometimes I think I pulled off, other times I think I don't. But again, it's up to you, kind of what you think about this. I was trying so desperately to make the entire thing accessible. The problem is, when professors, academics, philosophers try to make things accessible, they almost always make it sloppy and patronizing. This is the way that I look at the vast majority of the books that are selling hundreds of thousands more than mine, that editors kept thinking mine was kind of competing with, and it's not that these are bad, it's just, it's motivational self-help stuff, which is not what I'm doing, right? So like the Camping with Kierkegaard title, my agent and the marketing people wanted that to be something like how to live a life of joy and avoid despair. And I was like, well, that's not false. That's so not what I'm doing, right? Like, I'm not Oprah. I'm not Brene Brown, though I respect what she does, right?
The book would have been under our seat. If you were.
It's right. I mean, it's like, and so I say this to say gratitude is one of these things where I was trying so hard not to be patronizing, that there are moments where I'm expecting a little bit of, hey, I'm gonna have to struggle with this a little bit to kind of make sense of it. Gratitude, I was super worried that it get misunderstood as what philosophers call a theodicy. Theodicy is the idea, as again Christian could explain, that we justify evil in order to narrate and support the goodness of God. Don't worry about the evil going on in Gaza right now, the suffering. God's got a plan. It's going to all work out fine, right? So let's be grateful that God's got them too. I want everything in me not to say that. What I'm trying to say, do you see why that would be a worry? I kept blowing by. Theodicies, I think, contribute to evil. Yeah. When somebody's in the midst of the dark night of the soul, saying, don't worry, God's got it all handled. Like, that's not, no. That I actively think you made things worse. Even if it's true, you shouldn't say. So what I mean by gratitude is not that. It's not, oh, I now see that horrible experience. I'm grateful that it led to this thing and it justifies that suffering. No, sir. What I want to say is we always have an option.
Children.
And you've got the option. Is it bitter or gratitude or indifference? I'd have third, right? And those three will impact the way we make sense of ourselves and the future. I think gratitude's the best of the three options. So what I'm trying to do is say, hey, you're going to have to choose one of these things. Gratitude seems like it's got lots to recommend. So it's not, oh, this suffering, I'm so grateful for the suffering. No, I'm not. I wish I had avoided that. But I'm really grateful I didn't die in that wreck, right? And I'm grateful that I still am here. I'm grateful that there is the opportunity to do these other things. So if we think of it that way, it's not justifying, but it's always inviting us to locate ourselves as faced with that choice. I had a guy call me from South Africa recently, read the book. He said, would you Zoom with me? I was like, yeah, of course. So we Zoomed and he said, man, and he told me a horrifying story. His dad had a stroke. His sister died tragically in childbirth. I mean, just top to bottom. It was just like, wow. I mean, you're speechless listening to this guy's story. And he says, and yet you tell me I should be grateful. And I said, I'm never telling you should be grateful for those things. Right. I'm telling you, so given that those things happen, how then will you be today? And you got kids, right? He's like, yeah, I have 2 kids. I was like, so what is it you're going to invite your kids to inhabit as their future? Defined by your bitterness and anger, or admittedly letting them understand what grief looks like. And tragedy is real and life is not always going to work out, but showing them that gratitude and hope remain in the face of the impossible. Right. So that's the best that I could do, is try to kind of invite people there. The problem is to work it out really philosophically. The whole book would have been that and nobody would have read it.
I do like that I never thought of it, but you can either be bitter or you can be grateful, but I like, I'm going to use that. I'll quote you. I'll give you credit on indifference. Because there's just a whole lot of people that are in this indifference place.
And I thought, they were bitter. And now that you said it that way, I'm a cancer patient right now, and I'm weekly at an infusion center and have been for 3 years. So I'm like the long-term person.
Yeah.
And it is amazing how many people, I guess I just categorize them as bitter. And I really think, to be fair, they're indifferent. They're not great. They haven't gotten to a place of gratitude.
Well, and I would, by the way, never, ever, 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 that's what I'm trying to say, it's not a theodicy, say, I'm so grateful for cancer. Heck no. Heck no. Screw that stuff.
It sucks.
Again, my dad is 81 and has cancer, and there's never a day I'm like, oh, this has occasioned all this. No, I hate it. It's radically evil. But, and, right, in addition, he's not dead yet. Right? Like, so I have one of those little aphorism-y things. I wrote, he hasn't gotten to it yet. I'm interested to see what he
That's,
says.
that's Monty Python.
Yeah,
And
popped in my head.
And so, that's what I'm thinking about it. But I've waited for like a year to give somebody, you're not dead yet.
Yeah.
And it's a cancer patient, who's got a sick sense of
Yeah.
humor, and he finally made it through. And so I said, you're not dead yet. Happy birthday.
Well, so the way I put it in the book, this is one of these aphorism moments, says, my dad is currently sitting in the room with me as I write this. There will be a time when he is gone, for now that he's here is sufficient. Right? So for me, that's what gratitude looked like in that moment.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Do you go over anything with like parenting in the early years and stuff? Because like I'm talking about friends. My husband have been very transparent about our struggle
Yeah.
with our 5-year-old, and
Yeah.
we were having all this hope about school and like what that was going to do for him, and it's really backfiring, right? And so it's the system, and it's just like how it's built, and we're trying to not let that break us, or do you get what I'm trying to?
Oh, I do. I'm trying to find, I was looking for this one passage I was going to,
So you cover that in your-
well, I mean, cover, no.
You know,
The answer.
He has a sentence.
But I mean, cover, now, do I think that this will be relevant to that? Oh, heck yes. Right. So this is written, I mean, my bio on the back does not say professor of philosophy at Furman University, was president of the Soren Kierkegaard Society, has published 200 articles and 12 books. Like, that's all true. That's in the hardback version because they wanted like a big long thing. Well, but what this one says is Aaron Simmons is a philosopher, fisherman, mountain biker, husband, and father. So there is no way for me to write this book without my being a parent, being all the way through it. And in fact, one reader said to me, which as soon as they did, I was like, that's exactly right. They said, I wrote this book. I never thought of it this way. I wrote this book as a tribute to my father for my son to read. So it's absolutely something I think that is very relevant, because there is no bad exhaustion like early parenting. Like, it's not good exhaustion. You don't lay down at the end of the night and you're like, oh, it was so worthy. It's just, oh God help, right? But I'll share this with you again. It's not, so I don't want to address it like, now let's talk to this group. Again, it's not a self-help book, right? I don't do it that way.
sure.
But do I think it addresses that anxiety, that struggle? Yes. But maybe in sort of roundabout ways. So for example, one day my wife and son and I were driving by my university with my parents. They were visiting from out of town, and my son, who was probably 3 or 4 at the time, said, look, Grandma, look, that's Furman. That's where Dad lives. A couple years later, I was walking down the street in the city where I live, and I had my son's hand in mine. He was now probably 6 or 7. And out of the blue, he said, Dad, I don't want to be a philosopher when I grow up. To which I responded with exaggerated bodily expressions. What philosophers are the coolest? You're like almost Adam Sandler. He simply said, and of course, he's too young for pretense, for irony, for anything, right? he said, no, Dad, philosophers don't spend time with their kids.
Mm.
So do I,
Ouch.
do I address it not in so many words, but do I hopefully try to speak to those experiences? I hope so. I know we're getting short on time, but anything else I can address or answer?
Do you have the book on, audio book?
I don't have audiobook. It is available on
You need to
Amazon
do that,
via
dude.
Kindle.
You need to, yes, you need to read
Thank you
it.
so much.
I'd buy it.
I appreciate that more than you
I love
understand.
authors.
My 30-somethings aren't gonna, read it. They listen to it.
I do appreciate it. It's tricky, and I mean this entirely sincerely. The only reason I haven't yet, well, just because the book just got released, and normally Audibles kind of follow a little bit later. But the reason I haven't is because I went with a very boutique small press. Because the big presses told me they don't think I have enough of a quote built audience. And what that means is you're not successful enough at being an influencer for us to guarantee 20,000 sales in the first 30 days. So it doesn't matter how good it is. No. And my agent kept saying, you realize your whole book is saying the publishing industry is misguided. But what that means is whenever I do an Audible, which is certainly in the works, and I either have to hire a voice actor, which I probably wouldn't, that'd be way too expensive, or I've got to hire a studio. And so instead what I'm doing is working with my son, who's 14 and wants to be a musician and all this. We're creating a home studio for his music recording. And so I'm actually thinking maybe I can just do it myself and not have to pay $200 an hour at a studio, because that would, I can't afford it.
Yeah, I just, I love the message and just the way you talk and
I appreciate it.
message it. My kids are huge readers.
They all audio.
Readers. They're audiobooks.
Oh,
And,
believe me.
I read audiobooks because I can't skip chapters.
Oh, I feel you. I never listen to podcasts ever, which is weird because I've been on 10 or 11 podcasts in the last month. I don't listen to them ever. And yet I recognize the reason that I do that is because just in the last month, the number of podcasts I've done, they've been downloaded nearly 100,000 times. And so it's like, now it's not translating to book sales yet. Let me make clear. But I'm aware of it. But I do listen to podcasts when I drive. So like on this trip, all I have done is listen to podcasts. And I'm like, man, yeah, maybe I should, so you're not the first to suggest it. I appreciate that.
And the other thing is that you're a philosopher with a sense of humor, the first I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. I once had a friend who said of another friend that the guy was the most courageous philosopher in all of history, because he was willing to be clear enough to be read by people who could then understand him for offering critique. And it's like, yeah, I think this book is clear enough that the young parents and the old wise sages and the 16-year-olds all can say, nope, right? And I kind of like the fact that if they can say no, it means they understood enough of it.